Blood-red dust swirled across the parched Arizona street as Finn Evans dragged himself toward the only saloon in San Pedro, a town so insignificant it barely warranted a spot on any decent map. The year was 1885, and the West was slowly being tamed, but not the demons that haunted him. His weathered face, scarred from years under the merciless sun and from battles both chosen and forced upon him, told a story of hardship long before he ever spoke a word. The San Pedro saloon stood as the dusty town's beating heart, a rickety wooden structure that nonetheless promised whiskey strong enough to dull even the sharpest memories. Finn pushed through the swinging doors, his spurs announcing his arrival with a metallic jingle that caused a few heads to turn before quickly losing interest. He was just another drifter, another cowboy with ghosts riding his shoulders. "Whiskey?" he mumbled to the barkeep, dropping coins that clinked against the wooden counter. The amber liquid arrived promptly, and Finn downed it in one swift motion, feeling the familiar burn travel down his throat. It didn't help much anymore, but old habits died hard. "You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet," remarked a voice to his left. Finn turned slowly to find a man with a silver sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff Thomas Wilson was a fair man by all accounts, which made him something of a rarity in these parts. "Just passing through," Finn replied, his voice rough from disuse. The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if you're looking for work, the O'Brien Ranch about 5 miles north could use an extra hand. Lost a couple men last month to that fever that swept through." Finn contemplated another drink but decided against it. Work meant food, shelter, and less time with his thoughts. "Might check it out," he conceded. The following morning, Finn rode north on his faithful chestnut mare, Penny. The landscape was a harsh blend of rock and scrubland, dotted with cacti that seemed to mock the very concept of thirst. By mid-morning, he spotted the ranch, a modest spread with a 2-story house, a large barn, and several corrals containing cattle and horses. As he approached, a rifle shot cracked through the air. Finn instinctively ducked low in the saddle, his hand moving to his holstered Colt, but the shot hadn't been directed at him. Instead, he spotted a woman standing on the porch, rifle aimed at a rattlesnake that now lay dead in the dust. "That's close enough, stranger," she called out, the rifle now trained on him. "State your business." Finn raised his hands slowly. "Sheriff Wilson in town said you might need help around the ranch." The woman lowered her rifle slightly but kept it ready. She was tall, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical braid. Despite her work clothes and the dust covering her boots, there was something undeniably striking about her. "I'm Hope O'Brien," she said finally. "My father owns this ranch." Her eyes scrutinized him carefully. "You got a name?" "Finn Evans. You look like trouble, Mr. Evans." Finn couldn't help the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Most days I am, madam, but I'm also a hard worker who knows cattle and horses better than most." Hope studied him for another long moment before nodding briskly. "We lost 2 ranch hands to fever. Pa's been laid up with a broken leg for 3 weeks now. Calving season's coming and we're short-handed." She lowered the rifle completely. $15 a month, meals included. Bunkhouse is around back with the other hands." "Fair enough," Finn replied. "Frank will show you the ropes," she added, gesturing toward a grizzled older man who had appeared from the barn. "And Mr. Evans, we don't tolerate drinking or fighting here." Finn tipped his hat. "Yes, madam." The first week passed in a blur of muscle-aching work. Fences needed mending, cattle needed moving, and a particularly ornery bull had broken free twice, requiring the full attention of 3 men to corral him back. Finn worked from sunrise to sunset, falling into his bunk each night too exhausted to dream, which suited him just fine. He saw Hope occasionally, usually giving orders or working alongside the men. She was no delicate flower who shied away from ranch work. He'd seen her break horses with a firm but gentle hand, brand calves without flinching, and handle disputes among the men with the same decisiveness she'd shown that first day with the rattlesnake. It was during his second week that he properly met Harold O'Brien, Hope's father. The older man had managed to hobble out to the porch, his splinted leg propped up on a stool. "So you're the new hand," Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of authority despite his injured state. "Hope tells me you know your way around cattle." "Yes, sir," Finn replied. "Worked ranches from Texas to Colorado." Harold's weathered face creased with interest. "What brings you to Arizona?" Finn hesitated. "Just passing through." The older man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Most men passing through don't stop to work ranches." When Finn didn't elaborate, Harold sighed. "Well, your business is your own, I suppose, as long as you don't bring trouble to my doorstep." "No, sir, no trouble." That night at supper, Finn found himself seated across from Hope at the long table where the ranch hands ate. Usually she took her meals with her father in the main house, but occasionally she joined the men, especially when there was business to discuss. "We'll be moving the north herd tomorrow," she announced. "The grass is better by Cottonwood Creek, and they'll need the extra feed before winter." "That's cougar territory," Frank warned. "Lost a calf there last spring." Hope nodded. "Which is why I need our best shots." Jenkins, Rodriguez, and her eyes settled on Finn Evans. "The rest of you will manage the drive with Frank leading." After supper, Finn stepped outside for some air. The night was cool, stars scattered across the vast black canvas above. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Hope approaching. "Frank says you're a good worker," she said without preamble. "Try to earn my keep." Hope leaned against a post, studying him in the moonlight. "He also says you don't talk much. Don't join in when the men share stories at night." Finn shrugged. "Not much to tell. Everyone has a story, Mr. Evans. Some stories aren't worth telling." Hope's gaze was penetrating, as if she could see right through his carefully constructed walls. "Those are usually the ones that need telling the most." Before Finn could respond, a shout came from the bunkhouse, followed by raucous laughter. Hope straightened up. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." The cattle drive to Cottonwood Creek was indeed long and grueling. The herd moved sluggishly, constantly trying to stray from the path. By midday, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a rare autumn storm. When they finally reached the creek, the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. "We need to get these cattle settled before the storm hits full," Hope called over the rising wind. "Jenkins, Rodriguez, take the west side. Evans with me on the east." They worked in the increasing rain, driving the cattle into a natural depression that offered some shelter from the elements. The downpour intensified, soaking through Finn's coat within minutes. Thunder cracked overhead, spooking several cattle that began to break away. "I'll get them," Hope shouted, spurring her horse after the strays. Finn watched as she skillfully maneuvered her mount, cutting off the escaping cattle. But as she turned them back toward the herd, her horse stepped into a hidden washout. The animal stumbled, throwing Hope from the saddle. She landed hard and rolled down an embankment toward the now swollen creek. Finn didn't hesitate. He urged Penny forward, racing toward where Hope had fallen. He spotted her clinging to a protruding root at the creek's edge, the rushing water threatening to sweep her away. Dismounting quickly, he scrambled down the slippery bank. "Take my hand," he shouted over the storm. Hope reached for him, their fingers briefly touching before the root gave way. She plunged into the creek with a startled cry. Finn dove in after her, the cold water shocking his system. The current was stronger than he'd expected, pulling them both downstream. He managed to grab Hope's arm, then caught hold of an overhanging branch. With a monumental effort, he pulled them both to the bank. They lay on the muddy ground, gasping for breath as the rain continued to pour down. Hope pushed her soaked hair from her face, looking at Finn with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," she said simply. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack not far from the creek. It was small but dry, with enough firewood stacked in the corner to get them through the night. Finn got a fire started while Hope wrung water from her clothes as best she could. "Your men will be looking for us," Finn said, adding another log to the growing flames. "Not in this weather," Hope replied practically. "They'll hunker down with the herd until morning. Frank knows what to do." They sat in awkward silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Hope watched Finn as he stared into the flames, his face unreadable. "Where are you from, Mr. Evans?" she asked finally. "Virginia, originally, left when I was 16. "Family?" Finn shook his head. "Not anymore." Hope waited, but he offered nothing more. "You know," she said slowly, My mother used to say that keeping pain bottled up is like carrying a sack of rocks. It only gets heavier the longer you hold it. Finn's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Miss O'Brien, you don't know anything about my burdens. I know the look of a man who's been running, she countered. I've seen it before. My father wore that same expression for years after my mother died. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm continued to rage. I was a Confederate soldier, Finn said suddenly, surprising even himself with the admission. Too young, but they took me anyway. Saw things no boy should see, did things, he broke off, shaking his head. After the war, I drifted west, tried ranching, then drove cattle. Did some scouting for the army. His voice grew distant. Spent 2 years riding with Jackson's Rangers along the border. Hope's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the notorious group. The Rangers had a reputation. Deserved it too, Finn said grimly. I left after Coyote Springs. Even in remote San Pedro, the massacre at Coyote Springs was known. A small Mexican village burned to the ground, women and children among the dead. Official reports blamed Apache raiders, but rumors suggested otherwise. We were supposed to be after rustlers, Finn continued, his voice hollow. But Jackson, he had a different plan. I tried to stop it, but he fell silent, the memories too painful to voice. Hope moved closer, placing her hand on his arm. You left, that counts for something? Does it? Finn looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight in something darker. I've been drifting ever since, never staying anywhere too long. The faces follow me, the screams. Is that why you came to San Pedro, still running? Finn nodded slowly. Always running, always hurting. The storm outside began to subside, the rain softening to a gentle patter on the roof. Hope's hand remained on his arm, warm and steady. Maybe it's time to stop running, she said softly. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's storm had never happened. Finn and Hope made their way back to where the cattle had been left, finding the hands already preparing to move out. Frank looked relieved to see them, but asked no questions beyond confirming they were unharmed. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but Finn was acutely aware of Hope's presence beside him. Something had shifted between them in that lined shack, a connection formed through shared vulnerability. He wasn't sure what to make of it, or whether he deserved any kind of connection at all. For the next few weeks, Finn threw himself into his work with even greater intensity. He took on the most difficult tasks, worked the longest hours, as if physical exhaustion might quiet the thoughts their conversation had stirred up. Hope, meanwhile, maintained a respectful distance, though he often caught her watching him with thoughtful eyes. It was early November when trouble arrived at the O'Brien ranch. Finn was mending a fence in the north pasture when he heard rapid hoofbeats approaching. He looked up to see Jenkins riding hard toward him. Evans, the young ranch hand called out. Riders coming in, don't look friendly. Finn mounted Penny and followed Jenkins back to the ranch house at a gallop. As they approached, he saw 5 men on horseback facing off with Hope and Harold, who had managed to get himself onto the porch, shotgun in hand despite his still healing leg. Finn recognized the leader immediately, Raymond Blackstone, a wealthy landowner whose property bordered the O'Briens to the east. Rumors abounded about Blackstone's methods of expanding his holdings, none of them honest. This is a private matter between myself and O'Brien, Blackstone was saying as Finn dismounted. No need for ranch hands to involve themselves. When you threaten my family on our land, it becomes my business, Finn said, stepping up beside Hope. His hand rested casually near his holstered Colt. Blackstone's cold eyes assessed Finn. And who might you be? Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what you're doing here. Harold O'Brien shifted his weight, grimacing in pain. Blackstone here thinks I'm going to sell him my water rights, came to persuade me. The droughts affected everyone, Blackstone said smoothly. I'm offering fair compensation for access to Cottonwood Creek, better than what you'll get when your cattle die of thirst next summer. Our cattle are doing just fine, Hope retorted. And that creek has been O'Brien water for 20 years. Blackstone's expression hardened. Be reasonable, Harold, you're laid up short-handed. How long can you keep this place running? I'm offering good money. The answer's still no, Harold said firmly. Now get off my land. Blackstone's eyes narrowed. Think about it, O'Brien. Things happen to stubborn folks out here. Accidents, fires. His gaze shifted to Hope. Would be a shame if anything happened to your lovely daughter. In an instant, Finn had his gun drawn and leveled at Blackstone. That sounded like a threat. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Blackstone's men had their hands hovering near their weapons, but none had drawn yet. Just stating facts, Blackstone said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. Think about my offer, O'Brien. I'll be back in a week for your answer. He turned his horse and rode away, his men following close behind. Once they were out of sight, Harold sank heavily into his chair, his face pale with pain and worry. That man's been trying to buy up every water source in the county, he explained to Finn. Wants to control who gets water and who doesn't. He's not used to being refused, Hope added, her voice tight with anger. That night, Finn volunteered for the first watch. He patrolled the perimeter of the ranch, alert for any sign of Blackstone's men returning. When Hope joined him shortly before midnight, he was surprised but didn't object to the company. Pa's finally asleep, she said, falling into step beside him. Took some convincing. He should be worried, Finn replied honestly. I've seen men like Blackstone before. They don't make idle threats. Hope's expression was determined in the moonlight. We're not selling. This land has been in our family since before Arizona was a territory. My mother is buried here. They walked in silence for a while, their breath forming small clouds in the cool night air. I've been thinking about moving on, Finn said suddenly. After calving season, Hope stopped walking, turning to face him. Because of Blackstone? No, Finn sighed heavily. It's what I do. I don't stay anywhere long. Because you're still running. It wasn't a question. Finn couldn't meet her eyes. It's better that way. Better for whom? Hope challenged. Not for you. I've watched you these past weeks, Finn. You belong here more than you realize. The men respect you. Pa values your counsel. And she hesitated, then continued more softly, I believe you deserve peace. Peace isn't something men like me get to have, Finn replied bitterly. Hope stepped closer. The cowboy who's tired of hurting, she murmured. Her hand came up to touch his cheek, a gesture so tender it nearly broke him. Let me be the reason you rest, Finn. Stay, fight for something that matters instead of running from what can't be changed. Her words struck him like a physical blow, cracking the shell he'd built around himself. Before he could respond, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A lantern bobbing at the edge of the property. Get down, he hissed, pulling Hope behind a water trough just as gunfire erupted from the darkness. The attack was brief but devastating. 3 of Blackstone's men had crept onto the property under cover of darkness, setting fire to the barn and one of the corrals before firing on the ranch house. Finn managed to wound one of them, while Frank and Jenkins drove off the others. By the time they had the fire under control, half the barn was gone, along with valuable winter hay. 2 horses had been killed, and Harold had been grazed by a bullet while trying to protect his home. This is just the beginning, Harold said grimly as Hope bandaged his wounded arm. Blackstone won't stop until he gets what he wants. Then we stop him first, Finn replied, his decision made in that moment of clarity. I'm not running anymore. The following day, Finn rode into San Pedro to speak with Sheriff Wilson. The lawman listened to his account of Blackstone's threats and the subsequent attack with a troubled expression. I've had my suspicions about Blackstone for years, Wilson admitted, but he's careful, covers his tracks, pays off witnesses. The territorial judge is in his pocket too. So the law can't help, Finn concluded. Wilson sighed. Not officially, but if you're planning something, Evans, I might find reason to be looking the other way for a few hours. That was all Finn needed to hear. He spent the day gathering information about Blackstone's ranch, its layout, the number of men, their routines. By nightfall, he had a plan. When he returned to the O'Brien ranch, Hope was waiting anxiously. Well, she asked as he dismounted. We can't rely on the law, Finn explained. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. Inside the house, he laid out his plan to Hope and Harold. It was risky, but it might be their only chance to end Blackstone's reign of terror over the region. You're talking about taking on a small army, Harold pointed out. Even with all our hands, we're outnumbered. Numbers aren't everything, Finn replied. I learned that in the war, and I've made some inquiries in town. Turns out Blackstone has made plenty of enemies. Some of them are willing to help." Hope's eyes were bright with determination. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow night. Blackstone's holding a gathering for the county's wealthy ranchers. Most of his men will be occupied with security for the event." Harold nodded slowly. "I know several of those ranchers, good men who have been pressured by Blackstone." "If they saw evidence of his methods." "Exactly," Finn said. "We're not just fighting for your ranch, but for everyone he's threatened or cheated." That night, as preparations were being made, Hope found Finn alone on the porch. The air between them was charged with unspoken feelings and the looming danger ahead. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You could have left. No one would have blamed you." Finn turned to her, his expression open in a way she hadn't seen before. "I told you I was tired of hurting," he said. "But it wasn't just the memories, it was the running, the not belonging anywhere or to anyone." His hand found hers in the darkness. "You were right, Hope. I need to rest, and I want to rest here with you if you'll have me." Hope's answer was to step forward into his embrace, her lips finding his in the silver moonlight. It was a promise, a beginning in the shadow of danger. The next evening, their plan was set in motion. While Blackstone entertained his guests, Finn led a small group to the rancher's office. Years of stealth during wartime had made him adept at moving unseen. Inside, they found exactly what they'd hoped for: ledgers detailing payoffs to officials, threats against neighboring ranchers, and plans for damming Cottonwood Creek that would devastate smaller operations downstream. They were nearly discovered once, by a guard making his rounds, but quick thinking by Jenkins created a diversion that allowed them to escape undetected. Meanwhile, Harold O'Brien, despite his injured leg, had been busy too. He'd convinced several of the guests to step outside for a private conversation, right where they could witness Blackstone's men roughing up a local farmer who had come to plead for water access. The following morning, Sheriff Wilson rode to Blackstone's ranch with a warrant and 6 deputies borrowed from neighboring counties. The evidence was damning, and with multiple witnesses willing to testify, including some of the county's most respected ranchers, even Blackstone's influence couldn't save him. As Blackstone was led away in handcuffs, he spotted Finn watching from horseback. "This isn't over, Evans," he snarled. "I have friends. You'll regret crossing me." Finn merely tipped his hat. "I've faced worse fears than a man who hides behind money and hired guns." The weeks that followed brought changes to San Pedro and the surrounding ranches. With Blackstone gone, those he had terrorized began to speak out. The territorial judge found himself under investigation, and water rights were restored to their rightful owners. At the O'Brien Ranch, life slowly returned to normal. Harold's leg healed, and as winter gave way to spring, new calves filled the pastures, and Finn stayed. On a warm evening in late April, he and Hope sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Finn's arm rested comfortably around Hope's shoulders, her head against his chest. "I received a letter from the territorial governor today," Hope mentioned casually. "Blackstone has been sentenced to 15 years. His land is being divided among those he cheated. Justice is rare out here," Finn observed, "but sometimes it finds a way." Hope tilted her head to look up at him. "What about you? Have you found what you were looking for?" Finn considered the question carefully. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, perhaps they never would, but they came less frequently now, and when they did, he no longer faced them alone. "I wasn't looking for anything," he admitted. "That was the problem. I was just running with no destination in mind. And now," he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, "now I've found a place worth staying for, a future worth building." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "You asked me once to let you be the reason I rest. You are that, Hope. You and this land and the life we're making here." Hope's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're not just saying that, you're truly done running." In answer, Finn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small band of silver, simple but elegant, crafted by the silversmith in town. "I had this made," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you'll have me, I want to build that future together, as husband and wife." Hope's smile was radiant as she offered her hand. I will have you, Finn Evans, in all your brokenness and strength. We'll face whatever comes together. As the silver band slipped onto her finger, Finn felt a sense of peace he'd thought forever beyond his reach. The ghosts of his past would always be with him, but they no longer controlled his future. Here, with hope beside him and the vast Arizona sky above, he had finally found his rest. They were married that summer, in a simple ceremony attended by the entire ranch and most of San Pedro. Harold gave away the bride with tears in his eyes, leaning on a cane but standing proud. Sheriff Wilson served as Finn's best man, a friendship forged in adversity now strengthened in peace. As years passed, the O'Brien Ranch, now the O'Brien-Evans Ranch, prospered. Finn and Hope welcomed 2 sons and a daughter, children who grew up knowing their father's full story, both the dark chapters and the redemption he'd found. Harold lived to see his grandchildren reach adulthood, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. On their 20th anniversary, Finn and Hope returned to the line shack where they had sheltered during that long-ago storm. They had maintained it over the years, a private retreat from the busy ranch. As they sat before a crackling fire, much like they had that first night, Hope reached for Finn's hand. "Any regrets?" she asked, her chestnut hair now streaked with silver but her eyes as bright as ever. Finn shook his head, looking at the woman who had given him a reason to stop running, to face his demons, to build rather than destroy. "Not one," he answered truthfully. "You taught me that even the most tired heart can find rest in the right hands." Outside, the Arizona night wrapped around them like a blanket, stars shining down on the land they had protected and nurtured together. And Finn Evans, once a man who knew only how to run from pain, rested in the peace of having finally found his way home.